Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So the presentation of my talk will be from my doctoral research, looking at the microbiome and its relationship to human health. So a little bit of introduction. What is the microbiome and why is it important? So the human body is home to, on average, about 10 to 40 trillion distinct microbial organisms. And these organisms actually outnumber the number of human cells in the body by quite a substantial margin. So these microbial organisms collectively are known as the microbiome. Now, the next question, why is this important? So the growing attention has been given to the relationship between the microbiome, chronic disease, and neurodevelopmental conditions. In recent years, it's been shown that these many conditions actually have a dysgenesis relationship with the microbiome. And like when people commonly think of bacteria taxa, they commonly see them only as pathogens or the agents of causing disease, but rather these microorganisms actually play a vital role in ensuring proper human health. So before I go any further, I want to provide some guidance from the Quran. Like as with all things, the Quran provides considerable insight into the nature of the human condition, and this is particularly relevant in the realm of human health. Allah Ta'ala has said in the Holy Quran, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي قَبْضٍ. We have surely created man to face hardship. Allah Ta'ala also says in the Holy Quran, إِنَّ سَيَكُمْ لَشَادَ. Surely your strivings have been made diverse or are diverse. The reason that I chose these two verses to point out is that one of the biggest problems facing many developed nations of the West is an outbreak of neuroinflammatory conditions such as IBS, or inflammation conditions such as IBS, anxiety, depression, and autism spectrum disorders as well. So these conditions have a very interesting relationship with the microbiome. And this is something that even Western scientists in recent years have been publishing quite extensively about. One hypothesis as to how the etiology of these diseases emerges is known as the old friends hypothesis, which essentially postulates that exposure to the symbiotic microbes during childhood is instrumental for the adaptive immunity to properly develop in children. And now one of the consequences of urbanization and the rise of, mass-produced food and the way that it has been in the West is that the exposure to traditional microbes that people would come into contact with in traditionally agricultural societies is diminished. Additionally, children are not exposed to the outside environment as much as they have been in past decades and centuries. So this has contributed quite extensively to changes in the microbiome composition of people living in these countries. Additionally, with close urban populations, like the bacteria taxa diversity has diminished quite substantially, so that only certain organisms are able to colonize effectively in this new type of environment, which is contrary to how humans have existed for quite substantial amount of time. So in reality, it's really exposure to diverse conditions and diverse kinds of microorganisms that leads to the development of human immunity in the way that we understand it. And the reason for this is essentially when children are exposed to a diverse group of microorganisms as a child, their immune response is better able to understand that not every organism is a pathogen, and subsequently the immune response is able to be better modulated towards actual threats. That's the reason why there's a rise in allergies as well as autoimmune conditions in many Western nations. That's one of the hypotheses that's been raised, but this is the one that has gained quite a lot of traction in recent years. So building off of this understanding, I want to turn to my focus in particular, which has been autism spectrum disorders. So recent studies have highlighted that there's an importance in the relationship between the gut microbiota and neurodevelopmental disorder. There's also an interesting relationship between stress response, anxiety, and memory function that is also closely tied to the role of the microbiome in the production of certain neurotransmitters, such as serotonin in the gut. So very quickly, I just want to touch on ASD in particular. Now, when people think of ASD, they commonly think of it as a neurodevelopmental disorder, which it is. It's defined as impairments in sociality and communication. It's estimated that about 1 in 44 children in the United States have this condition. And while the etiology of this condition is really unknown, it's commonly accepted that it's the consequence of environmental and genetic factors. Now, while it certainly affects the brain quite substantially, it actually has a systemic effect on many organ systems in the body, including the gut. It's been demonstrated that children with autism spectrum disorders have less gut microbiome diversity than that of their typically developing counterparts. And the GI system of many children with autism is substantially distinct from their typically developing counterparts. Children with autism are 300% more likely to have some form of GI issue. And the relationship between the microbiome and the brain is something that's been gaining a lot of attention, and this is where my research seeks to focus. So the question then becomes, can reintroducing microbiodiversity in these children alleviate symptom severity? And our group has specifically done some work in terms of answering this question. We analyzed one treatment, which is currently used for C. diff infection, which is microbiome transfer therapy, as an effective means of treating children with autism spectrum disorder and GI issues. And we found that there was a 20% reduction in core ASD behavioral symptoms, which is something that's astounding, as there's currently no treatment for ASD behavioral symptoms at all. And there was an 80% reduction in GI symptom severity. So I don't have like a lot of time to go over into the specifics of our research, but just really quickly, like how MTT works is that the children are initially administered a bowel cleanse as well as an antibiotic to basically prime the gut for colonization with a new microbiome, which is derived from a healthy donor. This is lyophilized and given in capsules to our participants. And then following the completion of 8 weeks of this treatment, the microbiome is examined and evaluated to determine if there was a successful colonization or not by the donor microbiota. And our group specifically looked into like a number of different metabolomic and taxonomic measures of this. And we found that over the course of 12 weeks that we were able to see substantial changes in our ASD population to more closely resemble that of our healthy control donors. Specifically, there was a 31% reduction in significantly distinct taxa, so that were different between our healthy donors and our ASD participants, which shows that the children with ASD had microbiomes that were more closely similar to that of their typically developing counterparts when this treatment had concluded. This change was seen even 2 years after treatment had ceased. And as I mentioned before, there was a relationship between this and behavioral symptom severity. We were able to derive a linear model that basically showed how these taxa produce metabolites that modulate behavior. So this is something that's especially promising. So we can tailor our microbiota transfer therapy to focus on the microorganisms that promote good human health and human behavior. And in the future, this treatment is something that holds a lot of promise for helping children that have autism spectrum disorders, as well as other neuroinflammatory conditions. So I just want to acknowledge all of the work of my collaborators and my research group in this, and I look forward to your questions. Also, if there are any high school and undergraduate students, we have space in my current lab group at the Whitehead Institute and the MIT Biology Department, so we would love to hear from you.